Today we're going to be installing this full-length brake line with the Easy Speed Bleeder valve on this Blue Street Glide. So this is kind of just the tools we're going to be using today, and then our fancy little catch pan. Okay, so we're going to want to start off by removing the seat with a T27. I'm going to speed through and doing this here. Once those bolts of connection are off there, we can go ahead and remove the seat and set it to the side. Our next step is removing the gas tank cover console here. So your first bolt is down at the bottom. You'll remove that with a T27. Then there's a bolt up at the top that you'll remove with a 5/32 Allen. Okay, once you got those removed, you're going to go ahead and just lightly remove that cover there. And then there's just a couple more points of connection for the fuel tank we're going to have to remove first. So the first step is removing the vapor hose midpoint, which is located there behind the fuel tank. Just lightly unplug that connection, and then there is an overfill hose up by the gas cap on the left-hand side there. Just slightly unplug that. And then there's a fuel outlet check valve on the bottom left-hand side of the fuel tank. We'll just want to lightly unplug as well. Okay, and the last thing we have to unplug is the fuel pump plug here. Just lightly unplug that there, showing it to you guys. Using a 1/2-inch socket, I'm going to kind of speed through this. We're going to remove 4 bolts that hold the fuel tank down. There's 2 in the rear and 2 in the front. Once you got all those bolts out of there, you're just going to go ahead and remove the fuel tank carefully. Set it on a moving blanket or somewhere safe. Step is removing the right side saddlebag there, so just lightly loosen that up. We don't need to remove it all the way. Just trying to get to that right side cover there. We'll get that off there so we can have good exposure to the ABS block. And then we'll just slightly retighten our saddlebag. So now once we have all that done, we're going to go ahead, and you guys might be different for your bike, but we're just showing it on the Street Glide here. So we're going to remove the windshield and fairing. Mainly for these bolts and everything that's on the fairing, you'll be using a T27, a T25, and a 1/2-inch socket, and maybe some needle nose pliers. I'm kind of going to speed through and doing this here. Just using a needle nose plier there to get rid of those clips. Pull out the clips and get rid of them. I'm gonna remove the bolts on the inside of the bearing here. I think there's about 6 of them on this Street Glide. 3 on the left, 3 on the right. Okay, we're just gonna unplug the headlight there. Outer fairing off to the side. Now we're gonna start removing this inner fairing portion. Lightly remove the ignition switch cover. Using a Phillips there. Lightly pull off that little plastic piece there. And there's another little plastic cover here you want to lightly pull off. Okay, just a few more bolts here and there. So now using a T27, we're going to lightly pull back this fairing, and then we are going to remove the brake line clamp that holds it onto the upper fork stem bracket. So just that little screw there. And you're actually going to want to save this boot and clip for later, this bracket setup, just to put back on your new line. Lightly set that bearing in place there. Okay, so now we're going to start removing and loosening up this brake line from the frame. So there's just a few ties you're going to have to cut there. Then using a pick, I'm going to get down there and unclip those plastic clips there. And then we're just going to use these picks and straight screwdriver to just get these plugs unplugged from the bearing. And now we're just going to set that fairing off to the side. And we're just going to start taking this brake line out of the brackets that are on the frame. Just a couple there, holding it in place. Okay, so now we're using a T27 to remove the master cylinder here. You're going to want to make sure you have a catch band handy for the next steps of this install, just so you're not making a mess everywhere. You're going to use a 12mm wrench to loosen up this stock banjo bolt, and you will keep this one up here for the master cylinder for later, but we do provide a new one for down there on the ABS block. So go ahead and get this brake line off the master cylinder here. You don't need those crush washers, we provide new ones, so you'll just leave the stock banjo bolt in a safe space. So now you're gonna keep the eyelet end of this brake line upward, just so you're not spilling brake fluid everywhere. And then just kind of route it down the frame and then set that end in a catch pan. So now we're going to remove this bracket that kind of holds all those brake lines in place on the ABS block. You can just use a pick, being careful not to scratch anything, and just maneuver it out of there. It's kind of tricky. But that's what that little bracket looks like. It's just a little plastic piece. Okay, now using a 13mm, we're gonna just go ahead and remove that upper brake line banjo bolt there. Get it loose. And you will not need this banjo bolt anymore. We provide a new one with that speed plater valve. You just want to lightly get that brake line out of there. Go ahead and clean up any brake fluid you might have going on. So now you can go ahead and install your new brake line adapter with a crush washer, 12mm crush washer on the bottom side of the adapter and then the top side, and then just screw that banjo bolt through. You'll use a 13mm deep well socket to get that on there. Okay, so once you attach your new full-length brake line to the adapter there, you just want to go ahead and use your stock banjo bolt and attach the eyelet back to the master cylinder using a 12mm, and you'll just lightly get that in there for now because we've got to reassemble the master cylinder and kind of get your brake line in place before we tighten it for good. Tightening those screws back up with the T27 there. Just putting that plug back in. Okay, so you just gotta cut off this clip and boot that comes on your stock brake line just to put it on the new brake line to hold it in place on that bracket. And then you'll just bolt this down with the T27. You'll kind of want to adjust your slack here to make sure you have enough room to move your bars. Once you get that tightened, we're going to move back on up to the banjo bolt on the master cylinder. You're going to want to tighten that up to follow the flow of the bars so it looks even, and we'll just be using a 12mm to get that really nice and snug in a position you like. So now we're kind of routing the new brake line back into those clips on the frame there. There's just a couple points of connection, I think 3 on this frame specifically. There's an 11mm wrench to tighten the hex nut at the brake line adapter. Okay, so for the bleeding process, we want to make sure that our master cylinder is kind of at a level position so the brake fluid in the reservoir will drain properly. Okay, so you want to remove the brake reservoir cover with the Phillips. And it's always nice just to have a little shop rag on hand if you get brake fluid somewhere. Okay, and then we'll just add a clear hose onto that speed bleeder valve. We just pick jars up in a local parts store. Make sure that speed bleeder valve is tight the whole time you're doing all this install. And now we're going to crack it about 1/4 of a turn, just so we can make sure not too much air is getting back into the line while we're bleeding the brakes. Just make sure that hose is on there securely, and then we do have a catch pan, obviously. So now you can start pumping your brakes about 18 to 20 pumps. I've kind of got 2 shots of this, one lower and one upper here, just showing you the 2 different views I can get. These should bleed pretty quickly. If you're having any issues, you can always give us a call, but just adjusting that speed bleeder valve opening could help too. Okay, so once all that air is out of the line, just pinch that hose and retighten the bleeder valve. Then you're going to want to top off your brake fluid reservoir and put the lid back on, and now you can put your bike back together. like I said, you guys can always just give us a call for any technical support. Thank you.